Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Dyer. In today's episode, I'm sharing 5 true terrifying encounters with California's creepy legends. Each story blends local folklore with real-life fear that sticks with you long after it ends. But before we begin, please subscribe, like, and share with a friend. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you all. Now, let's start. I used to laugh at the stories about the Dark Watchers. People in Monterey talk about them the way old-timers talk about the weather and old roads. Tall shapes on the ridges, wide-brimmed hats, long coats, watching. No one ever sees them up close. They vanish if you look too hard. Every time I heard it, I smiled and said it was just tricks of fog and light. That was before I drove Highway 1 alone in late winter chasing the last light. I left Pebble Beach after a slow day at work and decided I needed the ocean. It was a rash idea. The sun was dropping. Fog was curling in like a slow gray animal. The air smelled like salt and wet sage. My tires hummed over narrow curves and the guardrails looked thin as bones. It felt like the road was stitched to the cliff by a single thread. I pulled into a turnout where the wind shoved the fog along the edge and revealed the water far below. It was that strange blue that looks almost black, like a bruise. The bluffs ahead rose in layers, dark against a fading sky. I turned off the engine and sat in the sudden quiet. Even the gulls were silent. Only the dull thump of waves rose and fell like slow breathing. I got out with my phone to take a picture. The cold bit the skin of my fingers. I stepped closer to the edge, just enough to see the rocky shelf jutting out. My footsteps crunched on gravel. That was when I saw it. A figure on the ridge across the small cove, standing on the highest point like a nail. At first I thought it was a dead tree. It was too straight, too still. Then the fog pulled like a curtain and the outline sharpened. A man, or something like a man. A tall shape with a broad hat and a long coat that hung like wet paper. It did not move. It was not facing me, or maybe it was. I could not tell. My stomach dropped, but my mouth went dry in a strange, almost calm way. I raised my phone and pinched the screen to zoom. The camera shook and I had to hold my breath. The lens found the ridge. The figure was there. My thumb hovered over the shutter. I told myself I would take the picture, then laugh at it in my car, then go home. The wind lifted and I tasted iron on my tongue. It was a tiny thing, like licking the edge of a coin. The screen fuzzed. Lines crawled across it. For a second, static whispered like paper being crumpled right next to my ear. Then the screen cleared just in time for me to see the figure turn its head. I know how that sounds. It was just a tilt, just a slight movement. But I felt it land on me like a hand. There is a feeling you get when someone is staring at you from behind, a little prickling at the back of your neck. This was like that, except it was a hook under the ribs. It did not step closer. It did not lift an arm. It just looked. The wind died. The ocean sounded farther away. I heard something else. It was faint at first, like a glass bell far off. Then it grew. A thin chiming sound without a rhythm, as if the fog itself had little pieces of metal inside it. I lowered my phone. I do not know why. Maybe I felt embarrassed to be recording. Maybe part of me did not want to bring whatever this was into the little rectangle I kept in my pocket. A slow, cold ache slid up my arms. My heartbeat felt wrong, like it was skipping steps. The smell of sage got stronger, but it was mixed with something else. Old smoke. Not a campfire smell, but the memory of a fire long gone. I took a step back. My heel knocked a small rock loose. It bounced over the edge and fell into the dark, and I could not hear it land. Right then, a shape moved in the corner of my eye. I looked left. Another figure stood on a lower outcrop, closer than the first. It must have been there the whole time. It was shorter. The hat was tilted. The coat hung open, like a jaw. A human part of my mind tried to count. 1, 2. I looked up, and there was a third on a thin spine of rock above and behind me, almost directly across the road. I do not know how I had missed it. It was like they had slid into place from seams in the sky. They did not walk. They did not sway. They just were. The chiming got louder. It was in my teeth. It made my eyes water. I felt an urge to step forward, to get closer to the edge and see if the ocean had stopped moving. The surface looked wrong, too smooth. I told myself to get in the car. I said it out loud because my voice sounded normal when I spoke, and that made it feel like the world still worked. Get in the car. The words dropped and went nowhere. I took a step toward the door. That was when the nearest figure lifted an arm and pointed down. I followed its finger without meaning to. The narrow goat path that locals used to fish twisted away from the turnout and slid under the lip of the cliff. I had not seen it at first. It was hardly more than a crease in the dirt. The figure's arm stayed up, patient as a signpost. I felt a push, a soft pressure between my shoulders. It was not wind. It was not my own choice. It felt like when you are a kid and an adult guides you with 2 fingers. I set my foot on the path. The gravel gave a little hiss. The fog pressed cold fingers into my ears. A darker patch waited where the path bent and dipped out of sight. The pointing arm lowered. The chiming stopped, like someone had cut a string. I swallowed and tasted iron again, this time warm. My other foot slid forward. A hand closed around my wrist and pulled. I spun, ready to shove whoever it was, but I saw a thin man in a faded orange windbreaker, hood up, eyes pale and glassy like tide pools. He shook his head once, hard, and his grip hurt. "Don't let them move you," he said. His voice was soft and hoarse, like he had not spoken in a while. "They don't make noise unless you're already close." For a second I could not feel my legs. The fog pressed against my eyes. The 3 figures were still on their ridges. I felt like I had a hook in my spine, tugging me back toward the path, but the man's hand kept me staked to the asphalt. "Come on," he whispered. "Walk backwards. Keep your head down. Do not stare at them." I did what he said. My heels knocked against the bumper of my car. The chiming lifted again, the exact pitch of a glass cutting wheel. It made me want to grit my teeth until they cracked. The man did not look up, but I saw that he had one eye clouded white. A scar ran through his eyebrow like a dry creek. His grip eased. He let my wrist go as if it hurt him to touch. "They tell you to go down," he said. "They always point where it is steep." I reached for the handle, but my fingers slipped. They were numb and wet. When I looked down, I saw thin gray grit on my skin, like ash. My throat burned. "Who are you?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Get in. Don't check the mirror until you're at the bridge. They hate reflection." It sounded insane and perfectly normal at the same time. I slid into the driver's seat and felt that sharp old car smell. Sun-baked plastic and dust. The man went around to the passenger side and got in without asking. He sat stiff and small, his hands folded tight, the nails torn down bloody. I did not remember seeing his truck anywhere. I wondered if he had walked out of the fog the way the figures did. The engine caught on the second turn. The radio came on by itself and hissed with empty air, then picked up a voice right in the middle of a word. "One else down there. Hello?" Then it went dead. The dash clock blinked nonsense. I put the car in drive. "Headlights off," the man said. "I won't be able to see." "You don't want to see them closer." I did what he said. The fog swallowed the road so completely that I watched the white edge line like a rope. The figures didn't move in the corner of my eye, but they were always there. One on the high ridge in front of me, one on the shoulder, one on the far side of the road. Every time I blinked, they were in slightly different spots, like chess pieces shuffled by a tired hand. "Don't look," the man said. "Use your foot. Feel the rumble strip?" The car vibrated over the tiny grooves. My knuckles hurt. He nodded once, satisfied, and then he told me his name without my asking. "I'm Eli." "Thank you," I said. The word sounded weak. I don't know what that was. "You know," he said, "everybody here knows. They pretend not to. They pass the turnout and feel a little cold and say the fog is pretty. Nobody remembers how many names are posted on the chain link." "What chain link?" "You'll see." We crawled along the cliff. Sometimes the fog opened enough to show a ragged bite of water far below. The ocean had that bruised look still, too smooth, like skin under ice. I tried not to think about the path I almost took. It felt like a wet string on my ankle. I could swear something still tugged there, lazy and patient. "Why do they point?" I asked. "To get you down where they can keep you," Eli said. "They don't push. They don't touch. They make you choose. That's the only way they like it. That's what the old guys used to say." "How do you know?" I asked. He didn't answer for a while. The chiming dropped and rose like far traffic. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow. "Because I went when I was 20. There was a girl with me. She laughed. We had a little bottle of whiskey. We thought it would be cute to camp close. I followed the hand when it pointed. She didn't. I don't remember the trail. I remember the sound. I thought it was the wind on bottles. When I woke up, it was noon and I was at home and my pockets were full of sand. She was not anywhere. I did not ask more. The white line led us to Bixby Bridge, its ribs ghosting out of the fog like a whale's bones. A small turnout before it was patched with flowers and plastic vases. There was a chain-link fence at the edge. People had clipped little notes to it. Sun had bleached the paper colorless. Some were photos. The fog licked them and stuck them flat. I could not make out any faces, just the shape of bodies with arms around each other. "Stop here," Eli said. I parked. My hands shook. The engine ticked as it cooled. The air smelled like wet iron and sage and something faintly sweet, like a cut plant. Eli got out and stood by the fence. He did not look over. He stared at the notes and the pictures as if he could read them all at once. "What do I do?" I asked. My voice had a child's sound to it. "Should I tell someone? Should I tell the park?" "Tell anybody you want," he said. "They already know." I thought then about my phone. I pulled it out and opened the camera. The last thing I had tried to take on the cliff was still in the gallery, a blurred shot of gray. When I tapped it, the picture sharpened on its own, like a wet image in a dark room. The figures on the ridge were just shadow. My breath caught because the frame widened, just a little, as if it had never stopped recording. There I was, 1 foot on the path, shoulders tipped forward, and there was the shape nearest me pointing down. But there was something else in the corner. A hand on my wrist. It was not Eli's. It was my own. Have you ever smelled burned hair when there's no fire around? That was the first thing that told me I had made a mistake going down Creek Road after midnight. The air was still. The stars were dim behind haze. The orange groves looked like a dark sea, and the wind didn't stir the leaves. I had the window cracked to stay awake, and the sweet smell of blossoms kept slipping in and out. But then came that other smell. It was sharp and sour, like a hot curling iron pressed too long against skin. I had heard the stories since I was a kid. People in Ojai said don't stop on the little bridge by the bend after dark. If you hear someone call for help, keep going. If you see a shadow in the trees, don't shine your lights at it. It's just made up to keep teens from drinking out there, I used to say. I said that to my cousin once, and he looked at me with a straight face and said, "He is real. He asks you to take them off." I laughed then. I did not laugh that night. I was coming back from a late closing shift at a place on the arcade. It was a slow Tuesday. My manager had let me go early. The main road felt long and dull, so I cut over. The turn onto Creek Road came easy, like muscle memory. My little car hummed along the narrow blacktop between the groves and the creek. The sycamores arched low and white over the water. The moon made them look like bones. I passed Camp Comfort and the picnic tables, all empty. No one was out there but me. The smell got stronger as I neared the old bridge. The bridge is nothing big if you see it in daylight. It is a short span over shallow water, with a low rail and stains where spray paint never really comes off. At night it looks longer. The asphalt turns to a darker shade right before it, like a bruise. As my headlights hit the guardrail, I saw something about the color that looked wrong. There were lots of black flecks stuck to the metal and the road, as if someone had thrown a handful of burnt leaves and tar at it, and they had melted into the surface. My radio dropped into static. It was smooth music 1 second, then a long hiss. The dash lights flickered. The car ran hot for no good reason, like I had climbed a steep grade. A flat wave of heat slid against my shins. I nudged the air knob and felt nothing change. The quiet pressed on the car like snow. Then I heard it. "Help me." It was not a shout. It was soft and low, like somebody trying not to wake their kids. It sounded like it came from the other side of the rail, down by the water. I hit the brake without thinking. The car rolled to a stop right in the middle of the bridge. I told myself there might be a homeless guy down there, or a hiker who had twisted an ankle. I told myself a decent person would check. I put the car in park and got out. The night air should have been cool, but it felt warm and close, like an attic. The smell of burned hair filled my nose and got into the back of my throat. My eyes watered. The creak of the engine cooling sounded too loud. Something ticked under the hood. I stepped to the rail, set my hands on it, and felt heat. The metal was warm, not scalding, not hot enough to pull back, but warm, the way a car hood is when you touch it after a long drive, except there had not been any sun all day. When I lifted my palms, fine black grits stuck to them. It looked like ash, but the pieces were curled, thin, and had a shine to them. I brushed my hands on my jeans without thinking and still feel weird about that when I think back. "Help me," the voice said again. This time it sounded like it came from under my feet. The creek ran slow and dark below. I bent and looked through the gap between the rail posts, but the light from my headlights didn't get under there. It just flattened everything into bright and black, like a stage. "Where are you?" I said. My voice sounded thin. It fell down and died fast. The frogs stopped. Even the water seemed to hush. There was a soft pat under the bridge. Then a noise like wet paper peeling from a pan. A faint scrape moved along the concrete, came toward the middle, and stopped below me. I leaned a little more. I saw a pale rope loop nailed to the underside from some old job. Hanging from it were things people leave at these places. A strip of gauze, a small bottle of water half full, a toy fire truck, sun bleached to pink. All of them were smoke-stained. All of them were slick with something that shimmered like sap. A thin whisper lifted right at my ear, even though I was alone on the bridge. "Take them off." I straightened so fast I knocked my hip on the rail. "Hey," I said without meaning to, like I was scolding a kid. My mind tried to make a normal shape out of the word and failed. "What?" "Take them off," it said again. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. It sounded like someone trying to talk through gauze soaked in water. The words had a soft crackle inside them, like a fire that won't catch. Behind that, I heard a little wet wheeze, in and out, slow and patient. My headlights dimmed and brightened once. The engine cough-clicked. The radio hissed and then made a sound like breath right next to a microphone. I felt heat slip around my ankles, like a warm hand moving under the bottom of my jeans. I stepped back. The smell of burned hair filled the car behind me and rolled out the open window like fog. I reached for the door handle. A dark shape slid along the far end of the bridge, low and slow, as if someone was crawling. The movement was wrong. It had a dragging sound to it, and every inch it moved left a smear on the asphalt that looked wet in my low beams and dried to black in a heartbeat. "Please," the voice said. The word was not shaped right. It stretched and thinned like plastic over heat. "Please." The shape hit my rear tire and stopped. The rubber warmed under my palm on the door. A faint little pop came from the sidewall like it had exhaled. I looked down the length of the car and saw fingers come over the edge of the bumper. They were wrapped in layers of cloth that had fused and shrunk. The cloth had melted smooth in places and bubbled in others. When the fingers tightened, little black flakes fell and floated and did not touch the ground. Something hot touched the back of my neck. It felt like someone had pressed a smooth coin right where my hairline ends. The tiny hairs curled with a soft snap. The smell of burned hair went bright and sour, right up my nose. I flinched and slapped the spot, and my fingers came away slick with something thin and sticky, like warm candle drippings. "Take them off," the voice said right at my ear. "Start there." I stumbled into the driver's seat and yanked the door. A hand-infused cloth slid up the glass. The fabric stuck for a second, and then tore with a soft rip, like sugar pulled too thin. Little black curls fell and floated. They did not land. They hung in the air like lazy snow and drifted toward the glow of the dash. The lock thunked on its own. The engine turned. The radio filled with a dry breathing sound, in and out, in and out. I shoved the car in gear. The headlights smeared the road. Something thumped under the middle of the car, and the floor went hot through my shoe soles. I drove anyway. The heat slid up my shins and pooled in my throat. "Take them off," the voice said, softer now. It sounded tired. It sounded like someone who had been burned and was trying to be polite. "They keep burning if you leave them." "What are they?" I asked, and I did not know if I meant the wraps on his hands or the thing on my neck or the flakes that floated to my vents and vanished inside. "Bandages," it said. "They put them on me. They don't come off unless someone helps." The bridge fell behind. The sycamores crowded close. Every shadow looked like a person on fire. I reached up and rubbed the back of my neck again. A thin strip of something had cooled there and set. When my nail slid under an edge, the strip lifted and stretched and then let go with a wet peel. The pain came late and hard, like a sunburn waking up. I sucked air through my teeth. The strip hung from my fingers, black and shiny. It smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. I rolled the window and tossed it out. It did not fall. It drifted backward alongside me, as if the air carried it. It kept perfect pace with my window, flapping gently as if weightless. "Please," the voice said. "More." "No," I said, and my voice cracked. "No, I need a person. I need help." I pulled into the gas station at the corner where the road meets 33. The lights were on over the pumps, buzzing. The store was dark. A moth hit the glass with a tiny pap, and for a wild second I thought it was on fire, too. I threw the car in park and ran to the bathroom door at the side. It was locked. I stared at my reflection in the smeared glass of the vending case. My neck had a dark ring at the back, the exact shape a bandage makes when it is wrapped too tight. My phone camera picked it up better than my eyes. The halo of the canopy lights showed a thin texture over the dark ring, like cheesecloth melted into skin. I touched it, and my fingers sank a little and stuck. When I pulled them back, the gauze came with them. It unwound with a soft hiss, layer after layer, each one thinner, each one hotter. The air steamed in front of my mouth. I felt dizzy. It was like pulling a thread out of my own throat. "Stop," I told myself out loud. The sound made the voice hush for a second, as if it was listening to me too. I wound the strip around my fingers instead of pulling more. My nails were rimmed black. The melted cloth made tiny, crisp sounds like leaves. "Thank you," the voice whispered. "Almost done." "I'm not helping you," I said. "I'm helping me." A shape stood in the far corner of the lot, just under the last light. It was a man, or what was left of one. He didn't move. He leaned a little, as if hanging by his shoulders. The air around him wavered. His head tipped toward me. I could not see eyes, just two wet hollows, and above them the white gleam of something smooth where the skin had glassed. His hands were wrapped to the elbow. The cloth had melted and fused, so that when he lifted one, the fingers moved together like a mitt. He lifted that hand toward his own throat. He touched the wraps. He didn't pull at them. He just pressed, as if remembering where they had started. I got back in the car. The toy fire truck I saw under the bridge sat on the passenger seat. I hadn't put it there. It was warm. The little ladder on it had melted into a curve. My stomach turned. I didn't want to know how it had arrived. I drove home with all the windows open and the radio off. Steam filled my bathroom. The mirror dripped. I stood under the shower and let cold water hammer the back of my neck. The black gauze softened and lifted on its own, one more layer, and then another. The water ran gray. The tub didn't catch any of it. The pieces floated in the spray and then rose into the steam and vanished, like smoke going back into air. When I killed the water, the house was quiet. In that hush, I heard breathing. It wasn't in the hallway. It wasn't outside. It came from the small space inside my mouth and behind my nose. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. My lips moved anyway. "Take them off," I heard, but this time it was my voice saying it from somewhere deep in my chest, and the last thin band on my neck tugged tight by itself, waiting for my hand. I booked the room because it was cheap and because I liked the idea of sleeping on an old ship. I told myself it would be quiet. It was a Monday in winter. The hotel on the Queen Mary was half empty. The fog over Long Beach lay low and yellow under the dock lights, and the harbor bell hit its slow note now and then, like a heartbeat with a cold. At check-in, the clerk slid my key card across and said, "You're on B deck, portside." He hesitated, then added in a careful voice, "One corridor over from the sealed room. You'll hear tours talk about it. Don't worry about it." He looked at me the way people look at kids who still want to ride the haunted house. I smiled like I did not care. I cared. The hallway smelled like old wool and soap. The carpet had a tight pattern that made my eyes tense if I stared too long. The walls were painted cream, and the brass handrail had a cold bite to it, as if the metal remembered being underwater. My door was B344. The next door down had no number. The wood had been painted over and over. Someone had bolted a metal strap across it at hip height and screwed it into the jambs. No handle, no card reader, just a long, low slot where one must have been once, filled with a plate the color of a bruise. I put my ear to my own door and laughed at myself. My voice sounded dull in there, swallowed by the bedding and old drapes. I unpacked, walked the deck, watched the city lights ripple in the black water, then came back and tried to sleep. That was when the ship started to do what old ships do. The hull popped like a knuckle somewhere deep. The pipes sighed. A draft slid under the door, salt damp and sweet like a wet rope. At 1:12 a.m., someone knocked. It was 3 slow taps, spaced out. I sat up. My heart picked up a little. It sounded like it came from the hallway, not my door, but close. The room had a green glow from the power strip, and the thin curtains let in a smear of sodium orange. I got up, padded to the peephole, and looked. The hall was empty. The carpet held no shadow. The air looked thicker near the sealed door, the way heat looks above a grill. I opened my door a crack. The hall fell quiet as soon as air touched my face. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. The sealed door looked smooth and blind. The metal strap had old fingerprints in the paint. I reached out and touched it with one finger. It was cold, colder than the rest of the ship. I pulled my hand back right away and told myself to stop. The phone on the desk rang. It wasn't my cell. It was the ship phone, an old plastic handset hardwired to the wall with a spiral cord. I stared at it for a second because nobody had that number. I picked it up and said hello. The line breathed at me. That is the only way to describe it. I could hear air going in and out, slow and close, like the person held the phone against their mouth and waited for me to speak. I said hello again. The breath stayed the same. Then I heard a soft scrape, like a finger drawn along fabric. A click came on the line. A second voice, very small, said, "Someone is in my room." I felt my skin pull tight. "What room?" I asked. My voice had a stilted sound, like I was reading a cue card. The breath paused, then very clearly, "Room B340. The line went dead. I put the phone down and stared across my room at the sealed door I could not see. I knew it was B340 because I had heard the tours say it. The door with the strap. The one with no handle. The one they said they used to open when they still ran it like a hotel, until guests kept complaining about water turning on by itself and blankets being ripped off and someone sitting on their chest at night. They said a man died in there long ago, locked in by crew during a crossing, after a fight. They said a child drowned in a tub that filled on its own. Stories layer on stories until you forget where one ends. I did not go to the front desk. I did not call anyone. I stood there for a long minute with my hand on the doorknob to my room and the ship breathing around me. Then I opened the door to the hall again. The sealed door had fog on it. It was only a thin bloom, like a breath had been pressed to the wood and left to dry. It had a shape to it, too. You know how glass fogs from your mouth and leaves around? This was an oval, oblong and tall, the right size for someone to have leaned their head there. A narrow track of moisture ran down from the center and ended at the metal strap. It looked like a tear that had waited and then let go. I swallowed and tasted salt. A soft trickle came from inside the sealed room, as if a faucet had been left a quarter turn open. I leaned closer, not with my ear but with my face, out of some weird wish to feel different air. The wood under the paint had a faint swell to it, as if it had been wet once and dried fat. Right then, from the other side, fingertips tapped the exact spot my forehead hovered over. 3 slow taps, so gentle they made the hairs on my arms rise. I whispered, "Can you hear me?" Something tapped back once in answer, and the metal strap jumped in its screws like it had been hit from the inside. The trickle sound behind the door grew a shade louder. No rush, just a steady thread, like a faucet a quarter turn open. The wood around the strap looked dry, but the air had that cool, damp taste old bathrooms have. I took a half step back, and the carpet under my toes felt chilly. "Who are you?" I said. I kept my voice low without meaning to. A pause. Then the same small voice I heard on the phone spoke through the door, too clear for how thick the paint looked. "Is someone there?" "I'm here," I said. "Are you okay?" The voice did not answer that. It said, "Someone is in my room." The words had that little catch you hear when a kid tries to be brave. I put my palm flat on the strap. The metal burned cold, like a coin from the back of a freezer. The screws made a dry tick, as if something inside pressed close again. "What room is this?" I asked, though I knew. "Room B340, the voice whispered. "Please." They locked me in. The ship phone in my room rang. The sound came through the cracked door behind me. A real bell tone that did not fit the late hour. I flinched and let the strap go. It clicked once in the screws like a sigh. I went back inside and picked up the handset. "Hello?" I said. The line breathed at me again, slow, steady, right against the plastic. Then I heard the scrape of a finger on cloth, and my own voice came over the line, thin and careful. "Someone is in my room." I stared at the handset until my fingers went slick. "Who is this?" I asked, but I already hated the answer I would get. The breath did not change. A click ticked in my ear, and the line fell mute. I set the handset down like it might decide to bite. The steady trickle behind the sealed door kept going, never faster, never less. I went to the front desk. The night attendant was a sleepy man in a navy jacket with a brass name badge and a face that looked like he had heard everything twice. He listened while I told him what I heard, and his eyes shifted once toward the security camera monitor, like he was checking if this would be recorded under guest issue or maintenance. "We don't have that room open," he said in a low voice. "You know that. They sealed it years ago." "I know it's sealed," I said. "It's not empty." He squared his shoulders like he was about to lift a box he had lifted 100 times. "Let's walk," he said. We moved down the hall. The ship hummed deep under our feet. At B340, he stopped dead. The strap had bowed so slightly I might have imagined it. Just a small arc as if something had pressed the wood. A dark line no wider than a thread lay along the seam at the bottom. Not quite water, not quite oil. It had no shine. It looked like a wet shadow. "You hear anything?" he asked. We both stood still. The trickle was there, steady as breath. Then something touched the other side of the door. Not a bang, not a hit. A slow, gentle drag, the way fingertips trace a nightstand in the dark to find a lamp. The metal ticked. The attendant rubbed his jaw with the side of his thumb. "They do that sometimes," he said, and his voice was kind in a way that made me want to shake him. "It's pipes. The hull cools and the pressure shifts." "They," I said. I nodded at the strap. "There's a person." He stared at the painted wood for a long second, and a tired look passed over his face. "I'll move you to a different deck," he said. "We'll comp the night. Leave it to us." "I'm not leaving it to anybody," I said before I could stop myself. "Who is in there?" He gave me the smile you give a stranger who wants to tell you about their dream. "No one," he said. Then he leaned and put his ear to the strap. Whatever he heard made his mouth go flat. He straightened fast. Keys, he said as if to himself, and then shook his head hard. No, we don't open that one. He walked me back to my room and stood in the doorway while I packed fast. The water in my sink hissed by itself for a heartbeat and shut off. I stared at the faucet, and the mirror fogged an oval at head height, like someone leaned close to look. When I wiped it with my sleeve, the glass went cold enough to bite my skin. They put me on a deck below, a room that smelled like clean soap and nothing else. The key card packet had a new number in neat black ink. I lay down with the light on and told myself it was a hotel and I was tired, and that was all. At 1:12 a.m., the ship phone rang. I lifted the handset. The breath came first, slow and even. I did not speak. I pressed the plastic to my ear until it hurt. Somewhere in the little hiss between sounds, I heard a drip. Then my own voice, exactly my voice, whispered, "Someone is in my room." "Which room?" I asked, my mouth dry, my chest tight like I had run. The voice on the line said, "B344. And then the metal strap on the inside of my new room door lifted a hair and tapped back down as if something had touched it from the wrong side. People in Pasadena joke that the arroyo has a throat. They mean the dam. They mean the dark arch cut under the concrete where the floodwater rushes in storms. They mean Devil's Gate. When I was a kid, my uncle told me not to whistle near it. He said the mouth under the gate does not blow back. It only inhales. I thought that was a good line. I grew up and forgot it. Then a dry winter came. The water ran low, and I decided to go down there alone with a cheap flashlight because I thought I wanted quiet. I parked by the trailhead in late afternoon and walked the dusty path under the power lines. The pylons hummed like big insects. The air smelled like hot sage and creosote and the thin metal scent you get when dust hangs over a riverbed. Crows drifted above the concrete face of the dam, slow and lazy, as if they were following a current I could not see. The shape of the gate up close is worse than the postcards. The shoulders kink out like little horns. The central arch is a dark oval, rimmed by iron bars. It does look like a mouth if you let yourself see it. There is a chain-link fence with a torn place low at the corner. The wire ends curl like thorns. I slid through and scraped my jacket. The spillway under my shoes had sun cracks in it and long black seams where tar had been poured and bled. Someone had sprayed a ring of paint around a circle in the concrete, old and pale. And on the ring someone else had written, "Do not let it finish." A row of chalk marks went across the wall, small vertical lines in groups of 5. They looked recent. When I touched them, chalk dust smeared my fingertip like cold flour. I climbed down the stair cuts toward the arch. The light got flatter the closer I went. Sound went weird. The freeway noise behind me folded away. Even the birds sounded farther. The bars across the mouth were thick and pitted with rust. The concrete around them had a shine where water had run and polished it. The air moved over my face, slow and steady, not a breeze, not cool, just a long pull inward that made the grit on the ground slide a whisper in the same direction. I stood off to one side and watched a candy wrapper creep toward the bars. It went slow and gentle, not like it was being dragged, more like it wanted to go. The smell changed. The hot sage thinned out, and something damp and cave-cold slid into its place. It had a wet paper smell and a sweet rot underneath. I told myself it was old leaves and a little sewer and nothing more. I pointed my flashlight into the arch and saw water a few inches deep, flat and black. The circle went back farther than the light could reach. The beam fuzzed out halfway to the first bend. The concrete inside was scalloped and ribbed from floods, like the roof of a mouth. A tangle of roots hung down in one spot, stained dark. When the air pulled harder, the roots lifted and drifted like hair in a current. There was a gap at the bottom corner where one of the lower bars was broken and bent. The metal had snapped long ago, and the end had been torched smooth by someone, as if it offended the eye. The hole was big enough if you unclipped your bag. I knew I should not crawl in. I thought about being 12 and daring my friend to spit into the arroyo. I thought about missing kids and old newspaper clippings and how adults whispered the name of the place when they said it. I told myself out loud, "Just look." I sat and slid forward and pushed my shoulders through. The concrete was dusty on the dry side and slime slick past the bars. The smell jumped as soon as my head was inside. It was the smell of cellars and clotting leaves and something like wet pennies. My own breath sounded too loud. I could hear my swallowing click. The flashlight made a pale circle ahead of me, and a thin fog in the beam made tiny bright specks, as if the air had dust that never settled. My phone buzzed in my pocket and then died. No screen, no little haptic twitch. It just went heavy and quiet, like a dead fish. I tried the flashlight button and the beam hiccuped and then came back weaker. On the left wall, about knee-height, someone had scratched hash marks so deep the concrete had torn little curls. 10 rows, each row had 10. The last row stopped at 1. I said, "Hello," before I thought about how bad that was. The word went forward and did not come back. From ahead and inside, down in the dark curve, something tapped the water twice with a small hollow sound. Then a voice that was too soft to be far and too close to be safe said, "Count with me." I backed until my shoulders hit the bars. The metal was cold enough to sting. The pull of air grew slow and strong, and the slick grit under my palms moved toward the dark even as I pushed against it. It felt like a tide you only notice when it has your ankles. The voice did not speak again. It breathed. It sounded like an old man trying not to cough. I told myself to get out. I put one knee up to twist and dropped my heel right into something stringy. It wrapped around my boot like thick hair. When I lifted, it held, and a soft suction tugged at the sole like a mouth trying to keep a bite. Numbers started in my head. 10, 9, 8. I did not count them. They arrived, like the thought of a song, at perfect, even spaces that matched the pull of air. The chalk marks had not been a joke. I pulled my foot hard and the stringy thing stretched and then let go with a slippery sound. The voice breathed in. The beam narrowed and went yellow, like a flashlight dying. 7, 6. The gaps between numbers thinned. The air draw got harder. The roots lifted and drifted toward me as if I were underwater. A little wavelet on the black surface touched the toe of my boot and left a stain like a tongue. 5, 4. The broken bar by my hip shivered. Rust dust fell in a little rain. The concrete arch above me creaked with a sound like teeth ground slow in sleep. 3, 2. The bent bar softened under my hand, as if the metal had warmed and gone like cartilage. It bowed in a slow, patient way, opening the gap not with a snap, but with a breath. 1. Something cold closed around my ankle from inside the dark, and the whole mouth inhaled. It was not a hand. It felt like a ring of soft, wet fingers with no nails, each the size of a worm, each pressing and tasting for a grip. The pull took the breath right out of my chest. My ribs hurt like I had been punched. I hooked my arm around the bent bar and jammed my shoulder into the gap. The metal gave a little warm and soft, as if it were bone. My flashlight jerked in my teeth and hit the concrete. The beam rolled and showed a pale something under the water, an oval that swelled and shrank with the pull, like a throat under skin. "Count with me," the voice said. It sounded too close, like it spoke from the water right under my boot. 2. The number slid into my head without my asking. A pressure built behind my ears like the start of a nosebleed. The ring at my ankle tightened. I felt the pull in my stomach and behind my knees. The grit under my hands crept toward the arch, tiny pebbles rolling against my skin one by one, like little tongues. I said, "No," out loud. My own voice sounded thin and wrong. I tried to count wrong on purpose. 7, 9, 3, I said. The next number still came, slow and patient, like a drop. 3. Something slick brushed my other foot. It left a sticky wet so cold it burned. The roots on the wall lifted like hair in a bath and drifted toward my face. I spat the flashlight into my palm and slammed it into the soft place where the ring held my ankle. The light went out. The hard tube hit something that gave and then clenched in surprise. The ring loosened just enough for my heel to slide. Skin shrieked against slime. I kicked with the free foot, heel first, the way you do at a dog. My heel met something that had no bones. The water made a thick slap. 4. The count pressed at my teeth. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. The bent bar groaned. I thought about the chalk marks carved into the left wall. 10 rows of 10. The last row stopped at 1. Do not let it finish, someone had written out there in faded paint. If I had let it say 10, would it have closed its throat on me? I did not want to find out. I jammed the dead flashlight into the gap beside my hip like a wedge and twisted my body hard. The bar creaked and scraped my jacket. My boot tore loose from the ring like a cork from a bottle. I felt skin go with it. Cold wet kissed my ankle. I slithered backward until my back hit the outside bars and the dusty air of the spillway reached me. It tasted like hot chalk and freeways. The pull did not stop. It tugged at my boots and the loose ends of my laces, patient as tide. 5. I threw myself sideways and out of the gap and hit the spillway on my shoulder. Pain popped white. I scrambled on hands and knees and did not stand because I could feel that if I stood upright, the pull would find my throat. I crawled like a kid. A little wave of sand chased my fingers, sliding toward the arch even as I moved away from it. The voice in the tunnel coughed. It sounded like someone had drunk water wrong. The pull eased for a heartbeat and then came again, not as strong but smarter, catching the bottoms of my pant legs, tugging the fabric like it knew how to ask. "Count with me," it said. The tone had no anger. If anything, it sounded sad. 6. I reached the first stair cut and grabbed the riser and hauled myself up. A candy wrapper on the concrete changed its mind and floated back toward the bars like a little boat on an inhale. The air behind me cooled my wet ankle until it ached. When I looked down at it, I saw a ring of round impressions in my skin, too regular for fingers, too soft for teeth. They were the size of coins. I got through the fence. The wire snagged my shirt and then let go in a little sigh. The pylons hummed like insects again. The freeway came back all at once, a rush that sounded safe. I did not look back at the arch. The sun was down. The concrete face looked flat and innocent in the low light. The mouth did not show unless you stood right in front of it. By the time I reached my car, my phone came alive in my pocket. The screen showed the time like nothing had happened. A text popped up from an unknown number. It said one word: 7. I threw the phone into the glove box and drove. That night I sat in my kitchen and put ice on my ankle. The coin marks had gone from red to gray. When I pressed around them, my fingers sank a little as if the skin there had not decided to be skin again. My apartment was quiet. The air conditioner was off. Even so, the thin plastic bag on the counter leaned in toward the sink. The curtain over the back door bellied in slow, as if the house had a small tide. My bathroom sink gave a soft gulp. The water in the trap slid away without sound. I stared at the mirror. Fog bloomed a little oval at head height like a breath, but mine was not that high. I wiped the glass. It went cold under my sleeve. In the bedroom, I turned on the lamp and checked under the bed like a child. The carpet felt cool on my palm. A faint smell of wet paper rose when I lifted the dust ruffle. It was stronger under there, the cave smell. I stood up fast and laughed, a quick dumb sound. "No," I told the empty room, as if that worked. "No." The laugh died too quick. The apartment drew a slow breath. Papers on my desk slid half an inch toward the wall. The lampshade tilted a little. A thin line of dust on the floor moved like a caterpillar. I went to throw away the ice bag and saw chalk in my pocket. I had not taken any from the wall at the gate. It was there anyway, a stub rubbed flat on one side. I did not want to touch it. The tip had a smear the color of old pennies. I dropped it in the trash. It tapped the plastic and stuck to the side instead of falling. I lay down and watched the dark. The count did not speak, but the spaces between breaths in my chest lined up the way they had in the tunnel. I knew what came after 6, even as I fought it. I held my breath until my lungs burned, thinking I could starve it out. Air forced itself in, all at once with a little whine in my throat, and the warm whisper from the vent beside my bed said, almost kindly, 7, while the last chalk mark drew itself on the wall, neat and straight, and then one more small cut started under it, waiting. Have you ever walked through a door and found the same room waiting, but one detail is wrong? That is how the Winchester house gets you. It does not jump or shout. It just moves one thing half an inch, turns a corner into itself, and waits. I booked a weekday tour because I wanted to see the weird stairs and the door that opens onto air. I like old wood and odd stories. I told myself the house was only a maze with a sad history. The air in San Jose was warm and still. The guide smiled with a patient face and said, "Please stay with the group. The house is built to confuse what follows you. It will confuse you too." The room smelled like shellac and old roses. Windows looked into other rooms. A door opened onto a wall. Stairs went up and then stopped at a ceiling. The guide tapped a spiderweb window with her knuckle and said, 13 panes. She told us about the bell she rang at midnight and 2 in the morning. Hammer sounds came thin through the walls, the way pipes clink after a shower. Every time we turned, I felt a small shift in the air, like someone had just walked through a second before us. We passed a narrow service corridor roped off with a faded sign. It said, "Staff only." The guide led us right toward the grand hall with the big stained glass. I lagged. I told myself I wanted one quick picture down that tight hall. "Sir," the guide said in a careful voice, "please don't." I said, 2 seconds. I slipped under the rope. The corridor was no wider than my shoulders and sloped just enough to feel it in my knees. The light fell flat and pale. The air smelled like varnish and dust. I came out into a bedroom with silk on the walls and a cracked mirror in a gilt frame. We had been here 10 minutes earlier. I knew it by the slant of the light on the bedspread, and the way the ceiling trim had a flower carved wrong in one corner. Only now the crack in the mirror went left to right instead of right to left. My breath went short. I could hear the guide's voice, but it sounded behind me even though the hall I had taken had been behind us before. "Everyone with me," she said. "Do not break the chain." I went back into the corridor. It felt longer going out than in. The floor had a tiny give, like a stage. I turned and stepped through another door and came out on the landing with the famous short risers. The staircase climbed like a child drew it. At the top, a door opened into air. I did not stand close to it. I stared past the railing at the yard and saw my group in the garden far below. I waved. Nobody looked. A voice next to my ear said, very soft, "This way is forward." And when I spun, I only saw a wall with a mounted gas sconce cold as bone. I started to notice my own footsteps had a friend. When I walked, another set walked a half beat after mine, heel then toe, soft and sure. When I stopped, the last step came late and then nothing. I put my hand against the paneled wall to steady myself. The wood was warm where the sun had hit it, but under the warmth, something breathed cool and slow, as if the wall had lungs. I moved on, down a hall too short to be useful. The doors along it had 13 tiny nails holding the plates, each nail head filed flat. My name came through one of the keyholes, whispered backward, letter by letter, a quiet scrape on metal. I found a little knee-high door near the baseboard. It was the kind you see in old houses for firewood or to reach a crawl space. It was unlatched. A tiny draft came from it, but it was not a breeze. It pulled, steady and patient, like somebody on the other side had a string tied around my ankle. I remembered the guide's warning and pushed it shut. It did not catch. When I stood, the bell from the old tower sounded once, faint and wrong, like a recording played a bit too slow. A woman's voice came from a floor vent, close as a mouth at my shoe. "Do not follow your own steps," she said. "It will put you back where you started, but behind." I tried to rejoin the group. I followed the bright velvet ropes. They led me through the seance room. It was small and square with 3 doors that led nowhere I recognized and 1 door that locked from the outside. The spiderweb window caught a weak band of light and made lines on the far wall like threads. My shadow stood where it should not, a little to the left of me. When I stepped, it lagged like my footsteps had lagged. A soft tapping came from inside the table, slow and polite. 13 taps, then 12, then 11. I said, "Stop." It kept going, patient and calm. I saw myself through an interior window. It was me, 10 minutes ago, laughing at the tiny stairs with the group. I mouthed, "Turn around." The me in the glass rubbed his wrist and did not look. I hit the window with my palm. It was not glass. It was a mirror split thin and hung where a window had been. The face on the other side lifted its eyes then, but it was not mine anymore. The mouth moved backward, swallowing words before they came out. It raised a hand and pointed at the knee-high door by my ankle. I heard the latch slip. The small door opened a finger width. Cold air pulled at my sock. The guide's voice drifted from far away, kind and bored. "Please do not get separated." I knelt and put my hand on the little knob and told myself I was only going to close it. The wood was warm from a hand that was not mine. The gap widened, an inch, then two. The space beyond was dark and tight and had faint flowered paper on the far side, like a child's room forgotten under the floor. The air that came out tasted like old lace and rain. I leaned closer to shut it. Something on the other side leaned too. I saw my own eye, reflected where it should not be, and I crawled through. The space on the other side was low and tight, lined with flowered paper the color of old teeth. The flowers were wrong if you stared. Some had 13 petals, some had none. Dust moved in the beam of my phone like snow. It drifted toward me, except I could feel a slow pull forward, as if the air itself wanted me deeper in. The door behind me settled on its latch with the softest click. I put my hand back and touched the knob. It was warm, as if a hand had just held it. The smell in there had no dust to it. It was lace and rain and something sweet and stale, like old hair oil. The low room ran on, then turned and turned again, with strange angles that made my knees ache. Somewhere inside the wall, a bell gave a dull tap, slow and lazy, like a tongue on a tooth. I crawled until my shoulders burned and came up into a narrow standing space with a grate at head height. I pressed my face to it and looked through. The grate opened into a hall I knew, but the hall was flipped. The gas sconce sat on the wrong side. The nail heads in the door plates shone like tiny eyes, and there were 12, not 13. My breath fogged the grate. The fog ran sideways, as if the draft went the wrong way. Someone walked by out there. I heard feet and felt them in my chest a half beat after they passed. The guide's voice slid along the wall, patient as always. "Please stay with the group." I saw the back of my own head with them. My hand came up and rubbed my wrist, the way I do when I am trying not to look lost. I whispered my name. The back of my head did not turn. I moved on, following the pull. Close to the floor, a little door waited, twin to the one I came through. It was already open the width of a finger. A chill touched my ankle. From inside that pocket space, a woman's voice rose from a vent, really near, as if the grate itself had a mouth. "Do not follow your own steps," she said. "It will put you back where you started, but behind." The voice had the flat tone of a guide and the breath of someone who had been under the floor too long. I knew the voice. It was mine. I pushed the small door wider and squeezed out into a bedroom. Silk on the walls. The cracked mirror. Only the crack slanted the other way again. The bed sat on the wrong wall. The door I had used earlier was a seam with no knob. The light lay in stripes that made no sense. My shadow stood a little to my left and blinked a second after I did. I stepped toward the corridor. My shadow stayed where it was, then caught up with a tired little skip. The floor vent near the baseboard breathed, in and out. I knelt and put my mouth to it. "Is anyone there?" I asked. The grate tasted like old pennies. Somebody answered through another vent far away. The words came back to me thin and slow, the way a record sounds when the needle drags. "Please stay with the group." I tried doors. Some led to short closets with backs that felt soft, like canvas stretched, and when I pressed my palm against one, something on the other side pressed back with my own hand a heartbeat late. One door opened onto the seam of the seance room. I could see the little table, the spiderweb window, the thread of light it threw. Tapping came from the wood, neat and polite. 11, 12, 13. It didn't count up. It put the numbers back where they had started. I remembered the first time I had seen myself through a pane. I had mouthed, "Turn around." Now that pane hung in front of me again, thin as paper. On the other side was me 10 minutes ago, tired and cocky. I lifted my hand now, and the me in the glass lifted his a second late, like a bad echo. He looked past me. He did not look at me. I put my palm to the thin surface. It was a mirror. It was a window. It was both, depending on which side you stood. A strip of cold slid over my sock. The knee-high door at my ankle opened another inch, soft as a sigh. The draft tugged. It was polite and sure. The house smelled like roses left in water too long, and shellac, and a faint heat like a match blown out. I thought of what the guide had said at the start. The house is built to confuse what follows you. It will confuse you too. I had thought the extra step behind me was a ghost. It was me. I walked backward. It felt foolish, but my legs did it. My heel touched the floor, then toe. The shadow snapped into place, right on me. The echo step went quiet, as if I had found the beat. The hall in the glass leaned, just a little, as if I were going down a gentle ramp. I kept walking backward until my shoulders hit a door. The latch turned under my fingers, and I slipped through into a fresh corridor that smelled like lemon oil and dust. The bell in the tower gave one slow ring. For a breath, I thought I had done it. I saw the group at the end of the hall. The guide lifted her hand. "Everyone with me," she said. Faces turned. My face too. My other me blinked and rubbed his wrist, and did not see me. There were two of me in that hall now. One a half step behind the other. I waved. The one in front walked on. The one behind raised a hand a second after, as if copying me, and pointed down and left to where a knee-high door sat by the baseboard, just open enough to breathe. The guide did not look. The rope moved, velvet and sleepy, and the group flowed on like a river. The little door pulled at my sock, gentle as a child asking. I could hear myself in the vent, very kind and very far away. "Do not follow your own steps," I said, in the voice I swear I heard when I was still outside. I stood there until my legs shook. Then I put my palm to the thin window and felt my own hand meet it. One beat off, cool through the glass. I mouthed to the man on the other side. "Turn around." He rubbed his wrist and laughed at the tiny stairs and did not look. The bell in the tower rang again, slow and a little wrong. Somewhere under my ankle, the little door sighed open another inch, and the draft found my skin. The house moved one thing half an inch. That was all it ever needed.